Howdy, and welcome to another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I'm your host, Daniel Dolphin.
Our guest today is Miss Rachel Kosmal McCart of Equine Legal Solutions. You're figuring I'm probably going to be in legal hot water here before long, so I better talk to a lawyer. Rachel is a leading equine law firm based in Portland, Oregon. She is licensed to practice in 4 states, California, New York, Oregon, and Washington. She is also admitted to practice before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, the U.S. District Court for the District of Oregon, and the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California. Rachel works with attorneys in other states as a consultant and pro hack vice. She provides services for all breeds and disciplines and represents clients in horse-related litigation. She helps resolve equine disputes, drafts, customize equine contracts, represents clients in matters pending before international and national governing bodies of equestrian sport, and forms LLCs and other entities for horse-related businesses. Rachel, how are you doing today?
I'm doing quite well. Thank you, Daniel.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure to have you on. I have been following you on social media for a while, and I really appreciate the tips and everything that you put out there. And I think this is probably one of those areas of the horse world that we need to talk a lot more about and educate ourselves on, because I would imagine most of us are walking around unprepared and uncovered for things that the world might bring our way in terms of legalities and liabilities and all of this sort of stuff. So I appreciate you coming on and letting me pick your brain today.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Daniel.
We like to start everybody off with our icebreaker questions just to kind of build a little rapport and get us all relaxed. These are for points and prizes, so you want to be on your A game here. Are you ready?
I am ready.
If you were a Jedi, what % chance is there that you would misuse the Force?
Oh, maybe 5%. I'm a pretty straight arrow.
Okay. Morning or evening?
Oh, evening, 100%.
Okay. How long do you dunk a cookie in milk?
Ooh, trick question. You don't.
So is it no cookies, no milk, or just the two shall not meet?
Well, I'm not a milk drinker, but even if I was, I don't like soggy cookies. So nope. Just give me the cookie.
I'm sorry, but that's wrong. The correct answer is you hold them underwater just like a politician until no more bubbles come to the top.
Well, I might go for lawyers too in some people's book.
Only opposing counsel, right? If people don't recognize Clark Kent because of his glasses, do you think his optometrist knows his real identity?
Ooh, yeah, I would guess probably so.
Stands to reason. What is the best horse movie?
Oh, I think Francis Ford Coppola's version of the Black Stallion.
Okay. I'm not familiar with that one. I was thinking Godfather and the bed scene and all of that when you brought that up, but it's like that's a stretch in a horse movie. This got dark, but okay. I'll have to check that one out.
It's a visually beautiful movie.
I have actually got a he's a Missouri Foxtrotter, but if you can picture the Black Stallion, he is the Black Stallion. Shiny, gorgeous, long mane, long tail, just the picture complete. Um, what skill or technique do you not have with a horse that you admire in someone else and wish you did have?
That is an excellent question. There are some people that can ride any breed, any discipline, of horse and look good doing it. And that's something I really respect. That, horsemen who can walk into a barn, handle or get on any horse and make them do their job, that's impressive.
I agree. Less and less common these days too, right? We are more and more specialized in that kind of well-rounded thing as a thing of the past in a lot of aspects.
Yeah, I think that's right. We've really specialized our horses too, not just what we do with them.
Hmm.
The days of showing in halter in the morning and in performance classes in the afternoon are over, I'm afraid.
It would be nice to see that come back. It really would. Yep. What would you say is the most important quality of a horseman or horsewoman?
Patience.
Okay.
That you just can't be in a hurry, that the horse is going to progress at the pace that he's going to progress, and you can try and help him, but if you try and rush him, you're going to create problems.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how well can you back a trailer?
Ooh, I'd say I'm probably a 9.5.
I like
I've been doing it a while, Daniel. And
That's
I've
become
had
one
my
of my
current
favorite questions. Yeah.
I've had my current rig for quite a while, so I know exactly how big it is.
Bay or sorrel?
Well, those of us in the English disciplines would say chestnut.
Hmm.
For me, I'm a chestnut with chrome girl.
Okay. So let me tell you, there's a history to this one. I thought this was kind of just a filler throwaway sort of question when I first put it in there, and I quickly started noticing a pattern that I was not expecting. I figured it'd be just 50-50. It's like 90% people picking bay horses. And so I have coined the Bay Horse Mafia, and we've actually got merch, T-shirts, and hats, and coffee mugs, and all of that stuff now for the Bay Horse Mafia. So you are one of the rare people who did not say Bay right away, just so that you know.
Interesting.
I'm not a Bay person myself.
Wonder, just sort of in the general horse population, how much more common, if it is, that bay is over chestnut or sorrel.
Uh, uh, I'm not sure. I really, yeah, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to that kind of stuff anymore, but at some point, and for me, it's dapple gray. Anyway, like that's the dapple gray with dark points. It doesn't get any better than that, right?
Yeah, that's a beautiful color combination. That unfortunately they eventually turn white, and then you spend a lot of time washing them.
Dogs or cats?
I like both. That I think as a house pet, I prefer cats and cat-like dogs.
Okay, that's interesting. The only cats that I actually like are dog-like cats. I've had a couple cats that were special to me, but they were dogs in cat form, really and truly. But so I normally follow that up with breed. I honestly don't know any cat breeds, but do you have any? Are you a big orange male cat kind of person, or is there?
Well, right now I have Cornish Rex cats and Siamese cats, and they are all definitely very dog-like. Meet you at the door. They actually do tricks. They sit up, they spin, they speak for treats, and yeah, they're as dog-like as you can pretty much get. Oh.
Okay, that's interesting. I don't know that I've ever been around like a purebred Siamese, but to me they're the most cat of all cats in my brain, even though I have no actual experience with them. Just maybe it's based off of cartoons or something, but they seem to be the like pegging the meter on the cat end of the scale there. So that's interesting. I may have to
Well, they're
look
very
in.
smart and they have a lot of opinions. So,
I I know this was before my time, but when my parents first got married, my dad had a Siamese cat, and it hated my mom. Like every time she would turn her back, it would launch onto her shoulders and attack her and to get rid of the cat. So that's my only reference for an actual Siamese. But anyway,
Interesting.
okay. Now this is I warned you we might get a little controversial, so buckle up. Does pineapple belong on pizza?
Well, it might belong on somebody's pizza, but it doesn't belong on mine.
There's a This is another famous question, and I found an Instagram. I guess your phone listening to you and all of that stuff. This pops up in my feed. There is now a professional chef whose entire shtick is making pizzas more controversial than pineapple. So he is going like as far out on the hairy edge as he possibly can, and then he tastes them, and sometimes it's a hit, and sometimes it's a miss. But I'm
So,
hooked on that one now.
so what's the grossest one that he's made so far?
Um, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I mean, like he is freezing grapes and putting them on there, jellies, jams, cream cheese, a lot of prosciutto, bacon, and things like that. He's he definitely is fulfilling the mission statement of pineapples as tame as it gets with his deal there. But I don't know. I'm an experimenter with food. I'm happy to try new things and just see what the heck happens. So
Same, same. We actually have a little pizza oven, and yeah, I mean, it's just so good that we haven't really gotten much farther than the classic toppings.
okay, so I have a feeling you're going to take this in a direction no one has before, but what is your horse industry related pet peeve?
Dishonesty.
Oh, yeah. I kind of I think the best and worst people in the world are in the horse business. There's no middle ground. They're either like fantastic or con men. There's nothing in between in this industry. But yes, ma'am.
Well, as I tell my colleagues that, do other types of law, and they're like, "You do what?" And I said, "Well, the horse industry kind of makes the used car industry look like it's run by a bunch of Eagle Scouts." So, and unfortunately, it pervades the industry from the lowest levels, through the international competition levels. It's really a shame because ultimately the horses are the ones who suffer the consequences.
It kind of is, as you've been in this a long time and you get to know some of the people, like it's amazing some people are still in business. Like it's so infused in everything they do that they would rather walk across the street to lie to you than just be honest about things and all. And you just wonder like how has that not caught up to them and just taken them out yet? But it doesn't seem to, does it? For whatever reason.
Afraid not. Mm-mm. No, the only folks I can think of who've been, really effectively taken out of the sport have been, as a result of say sport stuff.
Hmm. Feral or spoiled? Which would you rather deal with horse-wise?
Boy, I think that really depends, like on what kind of feral and what kind of spoiled. I mean, feral is in you didn't halter break them as a weanling and they've been out there for 3 years eating grass. Yeah, I'll take that over a real spoiled horse. But but boy, you're like Mustangs on the open range that are mature horses that get captured and adopted out. I don't think I'd be qualified to tackle that.
Most people have no idea what they're in for if they put themselves in that kind of position. Yes, yeah. Do you have a least favorite barn chore?
Scrubbing water buckets.
That's a good one.
I
How
mean,
about a favorite barn chore?
well, I actually like cleaning stalls. It's, it's
Hmm?
instant results. You have a sense of accomplishment, And, it's something I do every day. I clean my own barn, and when it's done and stalls are all nicely bedded, sometimes it's the only good thing I accomplished in a day. So I'll take it.
Do you have any favorite words of wisdom?
Well, I can't claim them as my own, but when I was first starting out in my career, someone much wiser than I am told me to figure out what I'm good at and pay somebody to do everything else. And that was really good advice. That, I don't do my own social media, for instance. I'm not good at it and I don't enjoy it. I don't do my own tax preparation. Same reasons. It was really good advice. And I think it's applicable to any kind of business.
Crunchy or smooth peanut butter?
Crunchy.
All right. That could be a pizza topping right there. Oh,
It could be. I mean, there's such a thing as dessert pizzas. I haven't attempted them, but they're out there. I haven't gotten to that section of the pizza recipe book yet.
wait, you think about like Thai cuisine and stuff, they use peanut sauces and stuff, a lot in there. So,
Yeah, the difference is theirs isn't sweet though. And of course, American peanut butter has sugar in it, so it's sweet.
yes, ma'am. Would you tell us something unexpected about you?
Well, I think most people aren't aware that my husband and I grow produce for our local farmers market. And with a specialty in heirloom tomatoes and peppers. And so that's something that I spend a lot of time doing, and I really enjoy it.
Okay, so the nightshade stuff. So here's something I don't know if I've ever said, but I had a lot of jobs when I was a teenager growing up. One of those is that I had a 2-acre garden that I sold vegetables out of as well. I had all kinds of stuff, including peppers and tomatoes. So,
Nice.
what type of heirloom tomatoes do you like? Are you into the big, beefy, meaty, weird looking purple stuff or more standard stuff or what? You have a
Yeah.
favorite?
That's the short answer. I think I have about 20 varieties that I'm growing this year. And so they range from cherry tomatoes. I've got the little the Beams yellow pear tomatoes and the Austin's red pear tomatoes, the little cherry guys, and up through a variety that I'm really fond of. That's a huge slicing tomato called Old German, and it's a big yellow tomato that sometimes has some kind of pinky streaks in it. That
Mhm.
one and the pineapple tomato are probably the biggest ones that I grow, and that's another tomato that looks really similar to the old German. So I also like green zebras that I think they're the ultimate BLT sandwich tomato because they've got like a little bit of a spiciness to them.
Okay. What about peppers? What type of peppers do you grow?
So hot and sweet. My personal favorite are a shishito type pepper called Padron, and about 1 in 10 at the beginning of the season is a hot one, so it's sort of pepper roulette when you cook them up. Uh, toward the end of the season, almost all of them are hot. So
Mhm.
I like those. I grow a whole bunch of different kinds. I like poblanos and anchos, and um, we grow banana peppers. Those are pretty popular. Jalapenos are really popular. I grow the little Thai hot chili peppers. Um, yeah, it's interesting. Like among our customers, they're pretty much evenly divided between, how many people like the sweet peppers and how many people like the hot peppers, which I would not have predicted. I would have guessed
Mhm.
that there would be more sweet pepper customers than hot peppers, but that is not necessarily the case.
I'm definitely on the spicy end of that scale for my preference.
I like them all.
If you could choose any new skill, superpower, or ability that could be non-horse related, what would you choose?
A way to create more time in the day.
I have been praying for a 36-hour day for about 30 years now. Yeah, still hadn't happened, but I could do a lot more with a 36-hour day for sure.
Me too. Of course, the list of things that I would want to do to fill it would probably expand to fill the available space. That would be the problem.
Thoughts or feelings?
Well, I'm a more of a thoughts kind of gal most of the time.
I'm there with you. If not a lawyer, what would you have been professionally?
I think if I had a do-over machine, that I would have gone to vet school and I would probably be some type of real specialized veterinarian that fortunately or unfortunately I've had the experience of taking both small and large animals to veterinary teaching hospitals for treatment. And I think it would be really interesting to be on the cutting edge of, a particular subspecialty.
I like it. Are you decisive or indecisive?
Decisive.
Do you have a favorite piece of tack or horse-related tool?
Boy, I don't know. I have a lot of them, Daniel.
That's okay. This is one of those questions. When I wrote it, I was figuring it would always take a sentimental route, like, here's this bridle given to me by such and such or whatever. I don't think I've had one person that has answered it that way. They've all been, I have a certain type of halter that I like, or a hoof pick, or something, but it has been more of a pragmatic answer for just about everybody so far. So that's what I like about these questions. They reveal more than I ever anticipated that they would. So they're here to stay. Okay, so you are an English rider, so
Primarily, I have ridden Western, quite a bit in the past. But
well,
today I'm an English rider.
so ear bonnet or no ear bonnet?
No ear bonnet.
If you had to pick cold showers or cold food forever.
Cold food.
So as a rider, would you say that your hands or your legs are better?
My legs.
Right lead or left lead?
Well, I'm right-handed, and that tends to translate to my horses, so I would say left lead.
Do you know if you're right or left footed by chance? Like if we threw a soccer ball out on the grass and I said, kick that as far as you can, and you didn't think about it.
It would be right-footed.
Yeah. So there's a strong trend there on the right foot, left lead deal. Not always. We have actually had some people that were contrary to it, but what is the best smell in the barn?
A newly delivered load of hay.
So this may be, I should have brought it up a little sooner given what we just talked about, but sweet, salty, or spicy?
Ooh, why not all three?
It's a good way. Yep. Don't
I
tell me how to live my life.
second best smell in the barn has to be opening up the grain bin with the wet cob and smelling molasses.
Okay. What is your favorite dinosaur or deep sea creature?
Ooh, favorite dinosaur, Stegosaurus.
Okay. You might be the first Stegosaurus answer that we have had yet. So that's a pretty good one. Well, that concludes our icebreaker questions there. So let me just tabulate your score here real fast. I've got you at 5,634 points, which makes you our high scorer of all time. And
Ooh.
that entitles you to either a genuine compliment or an awkward silence, your choice.
Why not? I'll go with the genuine compliment.
Okay. So I really appreciated reading your posts and the advice and the pragmatic stuff that you've put out there. I guess maybe I'm complimenting your social media person, so I don't know exactly how that that works. But and I have also appreciated as I've asked the questions of you. You have probably taken more time to think about your answer and contemplate it and say what you want to say than maybe anybody that I have interviewed yet. And I really like that. I'm one of those people that when I'm having a conversation, people don't realize I'm thinking a lot of times. I will pause and they think I'm done and then they start talking over me. And also when I see someone else who is also a thoughtful and deliberate person with what they're going to say, I really appreciate that about them. My wife's over here rolling her eyes at me right now because she's the one that cuts me off all the time, right? um, and then you're also a fellow gardener. I mean, what is not to like about that, right?
Well, thank
So
you. That's very kind.
and I do appreciate you being willing to come on here and talk about this topic with us and share your experience and knowledge and expertise. Because again, I know this is an underappreciated and spot that we probably have a big weakness in, and for multiple reasons in this day and age, we all need to be a little more aware of some of the things you and I are about to get into. So I do appreciate you taking the time and coming on here and getting into this with me. So
Well, it's my pleasure, Daniel. So I should clarify one thing, and that's that I actually do write all the content that goes on our social media and our website. I'm just not the person who posts it. I don't want to know how to boost posts and all that kind of stuff. No thanks.
yeah, I hate it myself. I certainly do. So, well, my first legitimate question for everybody is, would you give us kind of the 30,000-foot view of what it is that you do?
So what I do is, you gave the long version in the introduction, but I represent horse owners and other participants in the horse industry in horse-related legal matters, whether that's litigation, whether that's matters before the governing bodies of equestrian sport, or whether that's drafting contracts. It's a pretty multifaceted thing, but if you are in the horse industry and you have a legal need, I'm the person that you come to.
Is there a sort of a most common thing that you do? Is it like 60% of it is boarding contracts or something like that, or it really is quite varied among the
Oh,
time?
I would say it's probably 80% litigation.
Wow. Okay. And again, I told you beforehand, I don't know if there are any lines here that I'm going to ask questions across or whatever, but if it is permissible to ask, is that mostly like between two parties selling a horse or something, or more in line with the person and a governing body type of association, or it runs the gambit, or what sort of litigation?
So I would say the most common fact pattern for a case that I have is someone who purchased a very expensive horse, usually well into the six figures, and the seller, usually it's the seller's agent as well, actively concealed something that was wrong with the horse, usually a lameness issue.
I could see that. Um, is there a discipline that you like? Are you more in the sport horses, race horses, runs the gambit, or anything like that?
Typically, the show horse industry,
Okay.
Western and English, that I've had a few cases in the racing industry, but not a lot. My sense is that, and I could be off base about this, but my sense is that the racing industry just assumes everybody's going to rip them off, and they budget accordingly.
Well, the reason I asked that specifically is that I'm sure you're familiar. We've had HISA come in the last few years and take over. And one of the significant changes that they made is that if a horse is claimed or purchased or anything, now legally all of the previous vet records go with the horse, where previously those records were property of the veterinarians. And so the records didn't have to go with the horse. So if they wanted more information, they would have to pay for more workups and so forth, which may be redundant tests or whatever. But now the vets can, they're essentially charging twice rather than a horse actually coming with a medical history, which wasn't the norm up until it was legally forced. So I was curious if you had any experience or opinion on that particular topic.
So I can't speak to that particular aspect of HISA. I was unaware of that requirement. Just as we were sitting here talking, Daniel, I'm thinking good luck enforcing that. That I think the only way that you could do that and be assured that you actually got all the vet records that went with a particular horse would be to have them microchipped, all of them, and that it be a requirement to provide veterinary treatment that the microchip be scanned, and that there'd have to be some centralized database of veterinary records. And I just don't see any of that happening.
Not to
Not here in the
mention
United States.
what sort of medical stuff on the track. A veterinarian's hardly the only person walking around with needles and syringes and things like that. So even if all you're saying went into was enforceable and occurred, then that still maybe is only 20% of the actual picture. So
Yeah.
anyway,
I mean, the cheaters are always a step or two ahead of the regulators.
yeah. So within the sport horse world and these types of cases, is there anything interesting you can tell us about without giving anything away or naming names or anything like that? Have you had any mind-blowing, I can't believe I'm a part of this sort of occurrences there?
Well, I can't discuss the specifics of any particular case, that, of course, I have a duty of confidentiality to my clients. There are some things that are in the public record that are part of court records, part of, records before the Olympic Committee. So things like that are a matter of public record. But I can't say that. Well, actually, I can think of one instance that, I have some clients that I represented before the U.S. Equestrian Federation that then escalated to, a matter before the Olympic Committee. And even after a couple of decades of dealing with underhanded tactics, I was still pretty surprised by some of the underhanded tactics engaged in by both the Olympic Committee and USEF. I mean, it takes a lot to shock me now, and I was still a little shocked.
So let me ask you this, because I guess I've never thought of this until you mentioned that, but when you are dealing with a governing body like that, are you typically representing your client? I guess I'm thinking of what the authority figure here is. Is it you in a court of law with USEF or whatever as your defendant or plaintiff, or I don't know what the terminology would be there, but they're the opposing team, or are you typically representing a client and they are the authority figure making decision? You're in front of, or is it both? A committee of USEF judging you outside of judiciary channels within their own house, so to speak? Or I don't feel like I'm articulating what I'm trying to say very well, but I think you get it. So
So it's an excellent question. And when I have a client come to me that has not dealt with a matter before one of the governing bodies, the very first thing I tell them is, make no mistake, this is an adversarial procedure. In addition, so it is my client versus the governing body. The governing body has already made the rules. The governing body gets to interpret their own rules, and that really sets up the client for an uphill battle, to be perfectly honest, that the governing bodies have already kind of made a preliminary decision if they've filed, a grievance against your client. And so you're in the position of having to prove the client is innocent. And at the same time, the governing body is in possession of all the evidence up until pretty much the last minute. So definitely you do not want to go into that kind of process representing yourself or being represented by somebody who hasn't navigated that process a bunch of times.
So here's like, I guess, as I'm thinking of a good number of the cases like that I'm familiar with, you use the term evidence, and I'm actually thinking of a lot of cases where it's more of a subjective sort of a thing, and there isn't necessarily hardcore proof, like medical tests or something like that. And even in the cases of some of the testing, like I'm thinking now of like the Tennessee Walkers and some of that stuff, there's still a good bit of a subjective aspect to the testing. You're ultimately, someone's opinion is that this is the case, and that's not necessarily a black and white testable offense. So how do you deal with a case like that where there isn't necessarily evidence, so to speak?
So, that's an excellent point, that there is always evidence of some kind. And by that, I mean, it can be declarations from witnesses, it can be footage somebody posted on social media, it can be an email trail. Many times, I'm in the position of representing an athlete before a governing body that didn't necessarily follow its own rules. And so how do you prove that they didn't follow their own rules, say, in selecting a team for an international competition? Well, you look at what they did do, and then you look at what the rules say, and you match them up. Something that's a little more straightforward, like a medication violation, there's always evidence, that they drew blood. Is there still blood available for testing? What was the chain of custody, after the blood was drawn, that sort of thing.
Do you feel like, and I guess this is going to be a really broad question, but even in some of these cases where there might be evidence, so in this particular case, I'm thinking of, again, the gaited horses and the soaring topic, and then with some of the race horses. So I was pretty involved in a lot of the stuff when HISA came around, and some interviews and things like that with the Equine Council at that time. I don't know if you are real familiar with HISA, but like the banned medication list is like a 78-page Word document with just line after line. Like there's nothing, like you can't hardly put water on a racehorse and it'd be legal. I mean, it's the list of things that are illegal. And so it does seem like honest mistakes could be pretty easy to make in that sort of an instance. You have some ointment that you don't realize has as its 19th ingredient on the label a substance that's now banned, and we're often looking at things in terms of parts per billion, and it's a drop of water in a swimming pool, and yet now you're in trouble for it. I think it's gotten to be the sort of thing where there are so many rules that there's no way to just live a regular life and not be in violation of something at some point in time, even though you haven't necessarily really done something anybody would consider wrong. So do you run across that sort of thing very often?
So some of the clients that I have who have medication violations, and again, I don't typically represent folks in the racing industry with medication violations, So, usually I'm dealing with FEI or USAF, but, it's the regulations are what they are. And, as we participate in the sport, we sign up to be bound by those regulations. And so we're responsible for the people who work for us and whatever medications they might or might not administer. So, I tell my clients that unless there's some kind of giant gaping hole in the governing body's case, that, if your horse under your control comes up positive for a banned substance, the best you can probably hope to do is not necessarily just completely walk away from it, but to negotiate what and when the penalty will be.
Okay. Make the best of a bad situation.
Yeah. And sometimes, there is an innocent explanation. I think sometimes, and I'm thinking of I have a certain well-known white-haired racehorse trainer who recently got reinstated at Churchill Downs. Sometimes the explanation for how the horse, acquired the banned substance in its system defies credibility.
Mhm.
And so if I have a client who comes to me, with a convoluted explanation that just doesn't pass the smell test, I'm candid with them. I'm like, I wouldn't believe it, and neither is the hearing committee. That the best you can do is, mea culpa. I don't know how it happened, but I'm going to make sure it never happens again.
Mhm. So in this world of testing and some of the subjective tests, I am thinking specifically here of again, I've been kind of involved in some of the fighting of legislation and stuff, and with the PAST Act a while ago, it came about that there were some what we might call activist testers who were pretty much failing every single thing that came in front of them just to more or less kill a show. And there was an appeals process, but then that takes weeks and the show's passed, and so they were there to do harm essentially. And there have been a few of those testers that have since been kicked out. But one of the things I found pretty shocking was there are some swab tests in that world. They use an infrared gun to look at heat on legs for inflammation and things like that. But the owners of the horses were not allowed to film the testers running the test and checking out the horse. And so I thought right away that sounded really sketchy to me, because if I want video evidence later of, look, this horse is obviously not traveling unsound, even though the tester said that it was, it seems, is it legal for them to say that you can't film this if you're suspicious of, like, if I'm the ninth guy in line and 7 people before me have been failed by the tester, I'm pulling my phone out and I'm videoing everything that happens from that point forward. I feel like I'm in a defensive position and something's going wrong, and they're specifically saying you can't do that. So does that hold any water? Should you do it anyway? What would you advise someone to do in a situation like that?
So I did have a client that had a right to compete complaint against a governing body of horse sport. And they were denied the opportunity to compete because the governing body's team veterinarian, who examined all of the horses, it was an interesting situation that the veterinary examinations for the team selections took place at different sites because the horses and their owners were located all over the country. And in this particular instance, my clients had had some not so pleasant interactions with the team veterinarian in different circumstances. And they felt like the location for the vet exam was designed to set them up for failure because of the uneven ground and a bunch of other factors, legitimate complaints. And they raised them with the governing body, and the governing body is kind of like, they didn't do anything. So my clients wisely decided that they were going to film the vet exam, and the team veterinarian stopped them and prevented them from doing it. And I thought the same thing that you did, Daniel, that boy, that sure is fishy. That, if you don't have, if you were doing things in a by the book, above board kind of way, everybody and their mother ought to be able to take a video of it. That's what I think.
Mhm.
Now, because you're talking about HISA in particular, I don't know what that body of regulation says or doesn't say about videotaping the testing.
So
I would,
this was actually the USDA. This was under the past act stuff with the gated horses. But yes, ma'am.
yeah, I mean, my personal opinion is it's kind of like police wearing body cameras. If you don't have anything to hide, you shouldn't mind if everybody watches.
I agree. With the clinician stuff and the social media stuff and all, I am at a point in my life where I feel like there's been a camera on me every minute I've been around a horse for the last 10 years. And I act accordingly. I just uh it seems like there's always people watching it, and maybe that's not a bad thing. You hold yourself to that standard where I'm sure we've all done things we regretted 20 years ago, and there's more cameras out there, maybe there'll be less of that. So
Yeah, I think the big problem with that is that, you've got your keyboard warriors who are dissecting, hours of video, and then they take the 15 seconds that out of context. And that's a big problem.
yes, ma'am. So why don't you we'll kind of get off of that a little bit. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your just personal horse background? You were 6 and got a pony, or how did it all start for you, and what was the journey like for you up till today?
So I started learning how to ride when I was 3, and that's when my mom got her first horse as an adult, who was a saddlebred cross of some kind, and his name was Destry, and he was kind of a saint. And, that he let all of us make lots of mistakes and didn't hurt anybody. So, but from there, things graduated as they tend to do with horse ownership, and went to then we got quarter horses. And as a kid, I grew up in the 4-H program in rural Ohio, and also showed quarter horses in Appaloosas. And then I went to college, and I was on the college equestrian team. And let's see, I continued to ride, where I could as a young adult. That when I lived in New York City, I even rode at the stables in Manhattan, which was an interesting experience.
Hmm.
You haven't had a death-defying experience until you've ridden a horse, from this really strange, you know, regular building that they basically converted into a stable where you had to lead the horse like up this ramp, and riding a horse like through midtown traffic to Central Park. It was yeah, I was young and dumb, and it was a good thing.
That sounds like quite an adventure. Absolutely.
Now I'd be like, that doesn't sound like fun. Why would I pay to do that? But as a family friend of ours said, young people think they're going to live forever. So
So, and what about so at that point you were practicing corporate law in New York, is that correct?
I was my first job out of law school was doing corporate law at a large law firm in Manhattan. So, and then
So,
I moved to Silicon Valley about a year later, and I did venture capital work and other things like that, and then eventually worked in-house for a couple of corporations. And I leased a horse for a little while, and took lessons for the opportunity to ride, and then I decided that, I wanted to have my own horse again. And so then I bought a paint horse that I still have. And he is 25 years old now. And I showed him in hunter shows and in paint horse shows. And then when I turned 40, I decided I'd always wanted to try 3-day eventing. And I thought that horse would be really good at it. And he was, and we had a lot of fun with it.
Well, I have to say that the hunter to 3-day eventing sounds like the full breadth of the spectrum. We're going from nice and casual to relaxed to full send, baby, across the countryside. So how did he handle that? Did he enjoy the full send aspect across the countryside? Let's
Well,
stretch
he
those
was,
legs a little bit.
oh yeah, that was his favorite phase for sure. And my friends used to joke that they'd like to watch us warm up because he was no stranger to throwing in a delighted buck after he went over a few a few fences in the warm up. So yeah, he was always had a little much gas in the tank, to be, really, really successful, at the breed show stuff and the hunter stuff. So the eventing was definitely much more his speed because he didn't get penalized for, showing some spunk.
Hmm. And then, so you said he's 25. So do you have some other horses that are a little younger in the lineup now as well?
I do. I have a nice quarter horse named Cooper, and I'm bringing him along, and hopefully he's going to be an event horse too. And then
Good.
I also have a young paint horse that I bought as a weanling to be an eventing prospect. And unfortunately, when I put him into training to get him started under saddle, because I decided that I was too old to do it myself anymore, that he developed some lameness issues, and unfortunately, he's going to be a pasture pet.
Uh-oh.
So, it's just the nature of horses that you hope for the best, and that's not always what you get.
It's for sure. When I was younger, I felt like they were indestructible, and the more I've been around and the more I know about them, I wonder how any of them are sound sometimes. After they're just kind of, I've known too many. You could keep them in a padded rubber room, and they would find a way to hurt themselves in some way, shape, or form. Right. So,
Yeah, as my old vet who's since retired said that, horses are born and then they spend the rest of their lives trying to kill themselves.
well, so what was the transition like for you from corporate law and then venture capital now to equine law? Is this sort of the I'm going to do what the hell I want at this stage of my life kind of an aspect, or what caused that, catalyzed that shift for you?
Well, it's a good question, Daniel. So that was about 20 some years ago
Oh,
that
okay.
uh, I was living in Silicon Valley. I was working at a corporation and, you boarded my horse because of course, people don't keep their horses in their yards there. And I got to know, people at the barn, and people started asking me to, oh, you're a lawyer, can you draft me a contract for this? What, give me legal advice about that. And when it got to be people that I didn't even personally know anymore who were asking me for things, my former husband pointed out that maybe that's a thing I should charge for. And one thing led to another, and the lifestyle of a corporate lawyer is not very well balanced. And so it was pretty appealing to do something else, and one thing led to another. So
Do you, I don't know if what kind of corporate lawyer you were specifically, but I guess in my mind that doesn't sound particularly interesting. So do you appreciate now that the law that you're practicing coincides with something else that you love? Or am I wrong about corporate law and widgets are endlessly fascinating, or I'm just totally off on that?
there were aspects of it that were interesting, but certainly the fact patterns of what I do now are far more interesting. So it's yeah, it's definitely more interesting that as I tell people, every time I think that I have heard of everything that could possibly be wrong with a horse, somebody tells me something that I've never heard before. And usually they've bought it with whatever it is. So it's it's interesting.
I'm kind of thinking of this because I know lawyers in their training, y'all are specifically taught classes on ethics and things like that. And to me, this is one of the weak spots that we have in the horse world right now. There are quite a few things going on that I kind of have some that would have to do with the governing bodies and some of the decision god awful decisions that they are making these days. So you're mentioning paint horses, and you now have a young horse that's got a problem that has sidelined it. I don't know if you're familiar with the reining world at all, but like there's a very famous, he's the 800-pound gorilla breeding stallion in the reining world. He's not technically a paint, but he's got the big bald white face, which coincides with a deafness gene. And so we have been almost that either are deaf or will carry and pass on that gene. In that same world, it's been new rules passed where and things like that. I would then say on the other end of the scale, so we were talking about medications before, one of the things I've always felt like we took way too far is some of the rules we have on doping, or what we call doping. So for instance, if you load 100 horses in trailers and you move them 8 hours away and unload them, 5 of them are getting out of those trailers sore. And if you look at the drivers who sat in the truck for the 10-hour trip, all of them are getting out of the truck sore. And if you
I know
tested
I am.
us, yeah, how many of us have Advil in our system the day of the show, yet we won't allow Butte in a horse or something like that? And I've always kind of thought that didn't really make a lot of sense to me. There should be some medications that are more permissible and reasonable, especially if you have veterinary care and we know what's wrong with this horse, and it's not, we don't have a tendon injury we're about to blow and cripple him for life. He's just sore from a trailer ride, or he's got a stone bruised, and like a little Advil is a reasonable thing. And obviously that doesn't fly in any aspect of the horse world right now, and that has left me scratching my head for 30 years. So do you have any thoughts on that sort of stuff, the ethical side of things?
Well, I know that, with USAF and AQHA and APHA, you are allowed to give your horse Butte. That there are limits, and you also can't mix and match NSAID, so you can't give them Previcox and Butte, for instance, or Butte and Banamine. But, I think that the medication rules that we have in place for those associations are pretty reasonable.
What about the sedation side of that? Do you have any thoughts there?
So I think if you have to sedate a horse to get it shown, it's not broke enough and it ought to stay home.
I have a pretty similar feeling on that one. I have to also say, this is just an aside, but in the reining world, like genetically speaking, those are the golden retrievers of the horse world. They're the most obedient, easy to get along with horses ever bred in the history of the world. And if you have to sedate that thing, like, you need to go find another job. You're just in the wrong profession, I think. That's just terrible. But
Well, the other piece of it is that, just because a horse was bred to do a certain job doesn't mean that it's going to like doing that job. And so if you've got to medicate a horse to get it shown because it doesn't like its job or it's just flat not suitable for it, find it another job. The HISA stuff, I don't really know an awful lot about it. That, because I don't have clients in the racing industry, it really hasn't been something that I've focused on. You know, Earlier this year, the show horse world was all freaked out thinking that USDA was going to send in lameness inspectors to their show. And, I knew it was never going to happen, so I wasn't too worried about it. So
that's actually something I know a lot about too. Are you comfortable getting into that? because that's Dr. Aaron Reiner, and there's a lot about that stuff that scares me. Simply if they put it into place, like the simple requirement of the inspectors sets up the situation where they can defund the inspectors, and then through a government shutdown or whatever, and then we have a de facto ban on the shows and things that are required to have the inspector. That's actually how horse slaughter was ended, inspectors, and then they defunded the USDA inspectors, and by virtue of the fact that the requirement couldn't be met, the plants shut down. And so that's already been in the playbook, and that scares the hell out of me. And that if that situation is allowed to set up again, doesn't even have to be on purpose. But I happen to know we have some activist type people in the USDA. In fact, that the head USDA veterinarian that's writing the code for APHIS and all of that is a guy named Dr. Aaron Reiner. And he has said in a room full of trainers in one of these educational seminars with regard to the PAST Act that had gone through in 2016, that he could see under the law any act of riding a horse being considered an act of soaring because it had the potential to cause the horse pain. This is the guy in charge of enforcement and writing the APHIS standards for the inspectors to follow. So that the potential setup there scares the hell out of me. It really does. So anyway, if you want to talk a little more about that, we can certainly go down that road. If not, no big deal.
Yeah, it's not something I'm well informed enough about, Daniel, to really have a lot to offer listeners.
Sure. So in terms of just the average horse owner and some of the liability things that they may worry about, is having a basic insurance policy enough for most people? Do we need more things in place to protect ourselves and guard ourselves from the things that may happen? I'm sure you've seen some stuff in your career. I know I was approached, it's probably been 8 or 9 years ago now, but there was a law firm in New Orleans here that wanted me to be an expert witness on a case where a random lady drove up to a boarding facility. She had no connection to it, no horse there. No, she's just a stranger who drives up to the parking lot, gets out of her car with a group of carrots, goes into the barn and starts feeding horses. And then the process had her thumb bitten off, and then turns around to sue the facility. It was her representation that wanted me to be an expert witness to testify that she had done a reasonable thing and that was okay. And I said, yeah, can't do that. I'm sorry.
First of all, she was
I'm not on her side. Yeah. But I mean, it seems like cartoon world. And then I get an email and I'm like, this actually happened. And these people are now having to defend themselves over this lady that trespassed, could have poisoned a horse for all they knew, had no clue of, insulin resistance, what the hell is going on, and then gets herself hurt in the process. So it's a scary world out there. What are we to do, Rachel?
Well, I think that the best thing we can do, Daniel, is put ourselves in the best position to not have those incidents happen in the first place, and then be protected if they do. So, if I were running a boarding facility, I would have a gated entry so that you could control who comes onto the property. At my own property, I have electric fences, and even though I'm at the end of a long, lane far off the road, I still have the warning electric fence signs. That, I think that we are unfortunately in a society where if something bad happens to someone, they are much more likely to look for somebody besides themselves to blame. That lack of accountability, I think, is a big problem in our society in general. And we just, no matter how careful we are, there's always going to be some yo-yo who manages to hurt themselves. So then what do we do? I think we don't let anybody handle our horses, like guests, friends of guests, things like that, without a liability release. We have insurance to protect ourselves and importantly, pay for our legal defense if we get sued. I mean, under the American system, anybody can sue anybody for anything. And even if it's really stupid, you can spend, tens of thousands of dollars to defend yourself with probably no hope of getting it back. So having insurance to, pick that up for you is really important. Most of the time, homeowners insurance won't cover something like that. And so, having an umbrella liability policy is a really good thing. And not just for the horses, for other things too. That, like I said, there's a serious lack of accountability problem, especially if you're somebody who owns their own home and looks like they're prosperous, you might be a target. I mean, it's really unfortunate, but I think that's where things are. If you are doing any kind of business type things with horses, that if you are accepting compensation in any way, shape, or form, and I'm talking about things that might not be so obvious, like you are half leasing your horse, you are allowing somebody to ride your horse in exchange for them coming over and doing some work around your place. Those are things that your insurance company is going to consider to be commercial activities and therefore definitely not covered by your homeowners. So be careful about getting yourself into those, like maybe the person, it looks like a business transaction situation to begin with, be mindful of that. And then, if you are running a business like a boarding stable, training, riding lessons, that sort of thing, have the appropriate commercial liability insurance. And I can say these things, Daniel, because I don't sell insurance. I don't get a commission on it, but it's important for people to have.
I just had to deal with that and renewing and all of that about a month ago, and it's like the colonoscopy once a year. You have to answer all of the questions, maybe take pictures of your fence, and it's just like, but it is important. It's the cactus you have to hug and take care of. Yes, ma'am. That brings up a couple of thoughts for me, and I did kind of poll my followers and all, and I got a private message from a friend, and this is a person I've known professionally in the horse business for almost 30 years. They were telling me that they had an incident. He's currently being sued on round 2 of this, where a he does trail ride type stuff, other things as well, but this was specifically a trail ride on his horses. He has good horses. This particular horse was a former mounted patrol horse, so lots and lots of experiences and training and so forth. And I don't want to say that the lady riding it was elderly, but she was nearer retirement than the start of her career. We'll put it that way. And she came off of the horse. Horse didn't really do anything to cause her to come off of the horse. She just kind of did and hurt her back and hurt her leg. And then I think she wound up having to have a knee replacement, which then became infected, and then an amputation took place. And so this just snowballed into a colossal nightmare.
Oh,
It wasn't really the kind of situation where he had done anything wrong or was really at fault at all. And at the same time, he's 3 years into lawsuits and all kinds of stuff at this point. It looks like they're coming back now. They sued him, but not for the full value of the policy. And so now they're going for the rest of what could possibly be gotten. And he's, stressed and it's just a nightmare. I mean, it really is. And I know the guy and I know his horses, and this is not a negligent sort of an occurrence or whatever, and he's still stuck. So one of the things he was telling me in this deal, and he asked to remain anonymous, so I'm trying not to give too much away about or anything, but I know most states, and I don't know if this is with all, but we've all got these warning under statute equine liability thing. Any participant in a horse activity and livestock and all of that stuff is. I had always heard that was a pretty ironclad thing, and if you had those signs up and all that. It was just acknowledged that this was a dangerous, risky activity, and people were kind of, you accepted the risk and you were on your own, and that was very protective legally of the facility owner, the people putting on the show, the whatever, because this law was, as long as you had it displayed. And what he's telling me is that apparently something happened a couple of years ago that pierced that veil, and now we are a lot more exposed than we realize we are. So thoughts on that? Is that a state by state case, a national thing? Are we safe with that sign up, or it means not a damn thing, or what?
So I think, the Equine Activity Liability Acts can be helpful. For one thing, they discourage people from suing in the first place, which is always valuable. That the plaintiffs bar, the folks who do personal injury, folk call them ambulance chasers, and, that they work on contingency. They are, of course, more likely to take cases that they think are winners. And on top of that, cases that they're not going to have to take to trial to get paid. Because, of course, they want a payday sooner than the trial is going to come around. So, obviously I can't speak to this particular situation that your friend is in because I don't know all the details. And even if I did, it would be inappropriate for me to talk about it. But Equine Activity Liability Acts have some things in common. Each state, of course, thought they could do it better than the next state, so each one of them is slightly different. But some commonalities are that it's not a get out of lawsuit free act, that there are some pretty important loopholes, if you will. And I am guessing that the loophole, and this it's all that is, that's a guess, that might be at play in that situation is that you can plead your way around the Equine Activity Liability Act by alleging that the person who is providing the horses or the equipment, chose poorly in matching up horses and riders, that they were negligent in doing that, or that, the tack and equipment, failed in some way because they were negligent for not checking it or providing faulty equipment, that sort of thing. So it's certainly not ironclad. I know that insurance defense lawyers would probably argue with me about this, but I think sometimes those statutes might do a little bit more harm than good for our industry. That, they're based on the principle of assumption of the risk, which is part of the case law anyway. And I think they're a little dangerous because, as you said, a lot of people think they're ironclad. Like, hey, if I put up the signs, I'm good. A lot of them also, are pretty strict that they only apply, if you have, particular language in your liability releases, that the sign is a certain size, that it's placed a certain place. And, you're just horse people, how do I say it? I mean, we like being out in the barn, and attention to that kind of nitty-gritty detail, probably isn't our strong suit as a group of people. So, the opportunity to go wrong and lose that protection is pretty high. I mean, I think it's 50-50. I'm kind of conflicted about them. That yes, you can occasionally, defend one of these cases and get it tossed at the summary judgment stage. But, do they do more harm by making people think that they don't need liability releases and insurance? I don't know the answer, Daniel.
What about the flip side of that is if we get a little more specific. So like the helmet release waivers, liability release waiver, I'm putting on clinics, and so every clinic has got a waiver, and I don't walk around and check everyone's tack prior to a clinic. It's kind of, you're responsible for if I see something in the course of, I'm going to speak up, but I'm not going to go make sure your ladder is dry rotted before you mount up. I've got 12 people and I've seen many situations where I've warned people that every clinic has two people that are about to die any minute, and they never know who they are. And so, like 90% of your time is looking around your shoulder and making sure that lady in the red shirt is still on top of the horse and not underneath it. That's the way clinics go. These other 8 people, I don't have to worry about. These 2 people are like ping pong balls just bouncing around inside of the what's the pinball machine. There we go. They're like little ball, ding 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 ding. Like there have been many situations where I see it going south and I'm opening my mouth, but in that third of a second, it goes from fixable to not or whatever. And by the grace of God, nothing really happens. But there have been many near misses in my
Well,
career
not
where,
good, Daniel.
yeah, I mean, you just like before you verbalize it, that horse could buck, or just everything happens so quickly. And so, like, I've always lived in fear that I've been, knock on wood, I've been very lucky. I've never had any participants get hurt or anything like that. I've been run over pretty good one time, but I've been the only one that's been concussed or anything like that. Are those types of waivers and so forth worth? I mean, I'm still going to use it, I guess, if regardless, but are we as protected by that sort of thing as we think we are, or not so much? Life can happen and you're still going to get sued.
Well, it depends on, basically, it depends on who wrote the liability waiver. Does it say all the right things? Does it include all of the, people that it's supposed to include? For example, if you're going to somebody else's facility to give a clinic and you're relying on that facility's liability release, that's really risky because you don't know who wrote their release, whether it's any good, and you're probably not even included in the category of people who are the released parties. So, that would be super risky, that you would want to have your own. You would want to get it from a source that you knew that the person who drafted it knew what they were doing. And not just a lawyer, but a lawyer who knows the panoply of risks, of getting involved with horses. Because, what makes a liability release enforceable, the idea is that the person who's signing it is agreeing to assume the risks of what they're about to do. And so in order to assume the risk, you have to know what they are. So the more specific that the liability release is, the better, because you're giving them more information about the bad things that could happen, in and around horses. We have, stock, liability release forms, that are one size fits many on our website. And oftentimes we'll get the question, well, how many pages is it? And I am fond of saying that once somebody has been sued or when there's an accident, they never care how many pages the liability release was. They don't care whether it fit on one page. All they want to know is, does it say everything that I need to protect me? So, liability releases can be excellent. That even the worst one will probably discourage somebody from suing you in the first place. But an even better one will prevent them from winning if they do sue.
So is that the sort of thing where this panoply, I love that word, of possibilities here, is that state dependent? Like I'm giving clinics in every state, other countries. So is that the kind of thing where, oh, I'm sorry, you don't have the correct language for Oregon, so you're screwed, sir? Or would we be in good standing anywhere with that sort of thing? Or it depends?
So it depends on whether, so a good liability release is a good liability release in all 50 states. If you want to take advantage of the possible protections offered by that particular state's Equine Liability Act, some of those statutes require you to have specific language in your liability release. You can have protection from a liability release that's independent of what that state statute might provide. Does that make any sense?
A little bit. Yes, ma'am. Magic words. That's what it's all about, right? The right magic words, and you're covered. The wrong magic words, and that's what you speak this extra language where you know the magic words.
Well, I mean,
Not to boil it down to that, but
part of how I explain it is if in your laundry list of terrible things that horses do to hurt people, you happen to have the exact same thing that occurred with the accident, like let's say with your dude string trail horses, that horses are known to suddenly rear up and run off bucking, and that's exactly what happened. Well, there you go. It's right there in the text of the liability release that the person, who signed up for the dude string ride agreed to accept that particular risk. So, that's why more specific is better.
Okay.
Like you can't
Interesting.
just have like the one liner, horses are dangerous, watch out. Because, if you don't know anything about horses, you don't know what makes them dangerous. So,
Is it as technical as we describe all of this with horses, but I have one person here on a mule, and it would be the mule person that gets hurt, and the word mule isn't in my liability? Is that kind of a problem? Is that technical, or no? Or is that why equine is used and not horse?
that's why equine is used, because then it doesn't matter, they could be on a Zorse and it doesn't matter. So,
It's exactly there's always a Zorse person out there, isn't there?
and that's who's coming to your clinics, Daniel.
Why don't we'll take a few more of the questions that had come in from the people that I polled on Facebook and put those out there for you. So Jamie says, as a riding instructor, she's been offering. Oh, this is a good one, and this applies to me as well. She's been offering more virtual lessons out of her home state, which happens to be Oklahoma. There are no laws there for needing an instructor's license, but she says some states do require an instructor's license. Is that something she needs to look into for those states in order to help those people virtually, or does she just need to avoid helping people in those states? So that's
Well,
completely new to me. I haven't heard of any of that. So,
Well, it's new to me too, Daniel, that I had no idea that any states, required a license to be a riding instructor. So now I'm dying of curiosity to know where that is and what they require and, how one might go about, getting such a license. Is it a matter of will your check clear, or are there actually substantive requirements?
mhm.
That's really interesting. I mean, for Jamie, I would say that yes, you would want to investigate what states have that requirement. And obviously, if you can't meet the requirements, I wouldn't teach somebody in those states. It's not worth the risk.
So is because I do a lot of virtual lessons too, and I'm thinking even after I've just redone the insurance thing and all, I don't recall anything specific about virtual lessons in there. Does that, in your experience, would that change the game, or would we still generally be protected in the same ways? Or
Well, if I were doing it, I would have some provisions in there that are particular to virtual lessons. That the environment is different because obviously you're not on the ground. That you are only seeing, that snippet in time, particularly where it's not live, where the person is just sending you edited video footage, that you are giving the best advice you can based on the information you're given. And so it's automatically limited by the environment. So you don't see, what happened, yesterday when they rode the horse. You're seeing whatever they're presenting you with. You're not necessarily close up enough to see every single thing that's going on the way that you would be if you were right there in the arena. That,
mhm.
you're not seeing what their outside leg is doing because you can only see the inside leg on the video, for example.
There could be a 3 second lag too, where what you're seeing is the past. Um, I'll
Right.
say this is something I did change because of a specific incident. I was given a virtual lesson to a lady. She's in another state. She specifically has a horse that's got some problems. He bolts and bucks at times, and I deal with a lot of that. So that was why she was having a lesson with me. Um, and she has her cell phone set up to kind of catch most of the arena. And we've worked with the horse for 30 or 45 minutes. We're most of the way through the lesson, and she rides off into a corner where I can't, she's not on camera anymore. And 4 seconds later, the horse comes back into frame without her on it. And so I didn't see anything that happened. And it turned out her earbuds fell out when it happened. So I'm trying to talk to her and I have no response. And I like, this lady could have died off camera and I have no clue what's going, and I can't help her. And I also realized I can't even call like 911. She's gonna drag herself into frame, and I'm gonna watch her slowly bleed out helplessly. I don't know what county she's in. I mean, I have totally helpless here. And so I started. I call it the creepy email. And so if a new person approaches me about virtual lessons, I send them the creepy email, and it basically says, kind of outlays what I just described, and this has happened before. And so I'm not trying to be creepy, but if you want to do a virtual lesson, you need to give me the cell phone number of a point of contact, your husband or something like that, and I need your address. And not like I'm going to stalk your house, but like if you get hurt on camera 7 states away, I can send help to you and call appropriate people, and I don't have to helplessly watch you die on a Zoom meeting. So um, it's a surreal world that we live in now. And so I've thought about that in terms of how I might help them. I haven't thought about that in terms of liability or any of that up until now. God, why don't yeah. I should have just never played with that briar horse. My life would be so much less complicated, right?
Yeah,
Anyway, here we are.
those plastic horses are a gateway drug.
I was at an event, it was the Kansas Equifest a couple of months ago, and they had a briar horse show in conjunction, like in the trade building there. I had never heard of this. They had an auction. So apparently, like, people are getting hot knives and cutting legs off and readjusting them to make a horse in a certain pose and things like this and painting them. And then they auctioned them off. The top selling customized briar horse brought $5,000. Yeah, my jaw dropped too. I mean, I was like, for a 6-inch tall plastic horse, someone paid $5,000. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Well, but you know what the difference is between that and a regular horse, Daniel, is that the purchase price is the most expensive of the deal versus the least expensive.
Yes, ma'am. Oh,
You know, that sucker's not going to eat when you bring him home.
if the dog chews him up though, it's gonna be bad. Yeah. I don't know if I'm gonna feel better or worse after this conversation. I have to be honest with you. Okay. So our next question is from Laura, and she asks, what actual protections should we have in the industry, and is a written contractual agreement enough? She says she's in New York where it can be iffy.
So New York is one of the states where I practice, and definitely having a robust contract for any business, you know, not just the horse business, is an excellent idea. You know, kind of like good fences make good neighbors, you know, a good contract will set out all of the respective parties' rights and responsibilities so that everybody makes sure they're on the same page to start with. And then as things go forward, you've got something to refer to, like, no, that wasn't part of our agreement, here it is. So, you know, aside from just the liability perspective, you know, for example, if you're bringing a horse in for training, you want to make sure you're going to get paid. And if you have to say, you know, seek veterinary care for this horse and you can't get a hold of owner and somebody's got to give a credit card at the time that the horse gets treated, you want to make sure that 100% that owner is going to be required to reimburse you and do so promptly. So, you know, those just sort of nuts and bolts that absolutely. But to fully answer her question, you know, contracts alone are not enough. You also need liability insurance. And, you know, not just liability insurance, but the right kind. Typically, if you have horses that are in your care for boarding or training, you have what's called care, custody, and control insurance. But that's not really sufficient. You also need commercial liability insurance because, for one thing, you know, the limit per horse on care, custody, and control is usually fairly low. And it's most useful in terrible scenarios like let's say you got a bad batch of hay and, the whole barn full of horses died, that sort of thing. But much more likely than that is one of your customers slips and falls in the parking lot. So you need to make sure that you have, insurance that's going to cover, the range of random bad things that could happen.
Oh, I'm not going to sleep tonight. I can see all
It worries me
uh,
too, Daniel. It does. I mean, it is interesting. Some of the folks that come to me with legal matters and are itching to sue somebody, for lack of a better way to put it. And much more often than not, I tell them it's a really bad idea, that lawsuits are terrible investments. And, even if you have, a really valid claim, if you don't have a claim for attorney's fees, you're going to spend tens of thousands of dollars chasing this person, with, no hope of getting it back. And, even if you get a judgment, are you going to be able to collect it from the person? These are conversations I have several times a week. Other lawyers are not necessarily that way. It's probably why I drive an old pickup truck. But I wouldn't do it any other way.
I would like that. Yeah, if you were the lawyer with the Ferrari, that might be a red flag for me. So unless I needed you to sue someone for me, in which case, get them. But
Yeah, I think if they have a Lamborghini with a vanity plate that says Bulldog, look out.
Dr. Joe asks about legal liability of horses getting out and getting hit by an automobile, resulting in injury and or death. So this is the nightmare scenario that we all have. Tree falls, whatever, fences down, and you're sleeping soundly in bed while sugar is out on the highway, and boom. So is a typical commercial, or I say that I've always had a commercial liability insurance policy because this is what I do for a living, but I guess there's way more owners out there that aren't in this for the living. So is their homeowners insurance enough? I'll ask a caveat to that. Like I was on the Equine Council here for a long time, and one of the big things that we did was sell $19 a year, $1 million liability policy that was actually an addendum, a sub policy to your homeowner's insurance for this sort of thing. So what does that picture look like from liability insurance? Like there are different kinds. So maybe you think you have liability insurance, but it's actually the wrong one to cover you in this scenario. So what do we need in this scenario?
So if you're somebody like me who keeps their horses at home, I think you're better off with an umbrella liability policy and not one that's specific to the risks of horse ownership. And the reason I say that is because even though those umbrella policies are more expensive than your $19 a year, deals, which by the way are certainly better than nothing. But chances are you're going to encounter some other situation that's not horse related that would be covered by the policy. So you're right that that is probably one of the biggest risks that we face uh, as horse owners of being sued is, if Dobbin gets out on the road. If Dobbin gets out on the road, is it because our fences were made up of baling twine and prayer? Or, because somebody left the gate open? Or, was it a freak occurrence, like you said, that, tree dropped on the fence in the middle of the night? It's really going to turn on the facts of the particular case. Were your horses well known for getting out? Do you have the local pony stallion who is constantly visiting other people's properties and making a nuisance out of himself? Things like that, can play into what the answer is to whether you're liable or not. Are you in an area that's considered an open range area where the motorist has the responsibility to look out for livestock, not the other way around. It's really fact dependent.
I was about to ask about that because there are certain states where, yeah, that open range thing flips it around completely for us. Um, here, this is just an off the cuff question for you, but here in Louisiana, we now have a feral horse population running around in the state parks of around 1,000 head, 700 to 1,000 head of horses. And these are mostly horses that when slaughter ended and the bottom fell out of the market and people had no outlet for horses, they would drive them to the woods, turn them loose, go home, and some of them bred. And, so it has always kind of amazed me, particularly given in Louisiana, they're out in the dark woods, the long, lonesome highways. Like, I can't believe we don't have more instances of motorists hitting feral horses than what we have. But in that case, who's liable? Is that the state's horse now? Like, if you hit a deer, just your bad luck and your insurance company is on the hook, or do you have any idea how that might work out?
I honestly don't. That's a really interesting question. That could be like a law school exam question. Yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of, twists and turns to that people setting horses loose is something that happens out here in the West too, that, during the Great Recession, it happened a lot on national forest land. That I live really close to national forest land, and it was not at all uncommon to hear about, somebody finding, a stray horse while they were out hunting, people to wake up and find an extra horse in their pasture,
Mhm.
yeah, the random feral horse is an interesting question. I mean, my hunch, and that's all that it is that it would probably be like any other, feral animal. Would the answer be different if it was a hog? Probably not.
This is enlightening. That one makes me feel a little better for some reason. I'm not so terrified of a gate open at this point. Let's see. Some of these are a little redundant on liability protection. So this one is, as a horse owner, with regards to liability protection, what would they need in the event that someone comes onto their property and into their horse's space and gets hurt? And then Jess also about the opposite, which I guess we just talked with. Her horse got off property. Um, so is the general commercial or here again, I'm talking about the commercial. So for the non-commercial person, is that general liability policy going to cover some person comes onto your property, like the scenario I talked about before with the lady who decided to feed carrots and got her thumb bitten off? Um, I can just imagine the insurance agent on the other end of the phone, like, what happened again?
Well, there was
So,
actually another case that, oh, I forget which racetrack it was. I want to say maybe it was Emerald Downs in Washington, but there was somebody who was pretty knowledgeable about horses, was on the backside of the track, walking through the barns, and wasn't a trespasser, but wasn't staff or wasn't there in any official capacity, and one of the pony horses that was in a stall bit her pretty viciously, and she ended up suing and ultimately did not win, which was absolutely the right result. You're walking through the barn, something about horses, and you're feeding your fingers to them. I think she was feeding them treats even. That, you know, it was certainly, did she expect to be bitten viciously? Probably not, but it was among the risks that she should have been aware of. With random people coming onto your property, that is something that's really kind of state specific. That in some states, if you are a trespasser, the law protects the property owner. Other states, is your facility considered to be what's called an attractive nuisance, which I've always liked that term. But
golly.
that, are you in, and we're seeing this more and more, of course, as more of our rural lands are being turned into suburbia, that you have situations where you have horses that are in people's literally backyards, and next to them are densely populated neighborhoods with a bunch of kids. That, do you have liability for those kids coming over and feeding their fingers to the horses? The answer really depends on where you live and what the case law looks like there. So I would say, that's why, everybody who has a swimming pool has this big fence around it because there's a whole bunch of case law about swimming pools being attractive nuisances. So it's always seemed a little unfair to me that if somebody is a trespasser on your property and they get hurt, that it could somehow be your fault. But, some case law certainly disagrees with me.
So this brings up a tangential question for me, and this is probably just my unique traveling through the world and experiences that only I have had, and I think I have seen and known people, an inordinate number of people with serious bites from horses. And some of these are professionals. I knew one lady that she was a breeder, owned a bunch of brood mares, would go out into the pasture and check on her babies, and she had the horrible habit of feeding them sugar cubes and would keep them in her shirt pocket. And she had a mare bite her breast off going for the sugar cubes. I mean, I have multiple horrible bite stories like that I could tell. And this whole thing of hand feeding treats to horses, it's the cringiest thing I can see. It's an absolute outlawed thing around here. I do some positive reinforcement training with horses in certain situations. I honestly believe that only the most experienced people should do that, purely on the basis of the fact that it involves hand feeding of treats to horses, and setting that up can go really right or really wrong, and most people that are inexperienced get it really wrong and turn a horse dangerous, or a lot of them do anyway. So in your experience, have you dealt with a lot of bite issues as well, or is this just Daniel's weird world coming to
Well, I've been bitten myself, not seriously, and certainly know people who have, but not seriously. Um, I don't do personal injury work at all. So if you got injured by a horse, I'm not going to be the person you call to represent you in a lawsuit. That's going to be your plaintiff's bar, the ambulance chasers. And almost all those cases are defended by insurance companies, and insurance companies have their own stable of lawyers, if you will. So, so I don't, I don't, I would be surprised if I would be in a position to defend one of those cases. Now, I have been called about being an expert witness for personal injury type cases. So, which, if I was being hired by what I thought was the right side of that situation, I would consider it. If you fed your
Mhm.
fingers to the horses and you're now suing somebody, you don't want me to be your expert, and I wouldn't agree to be anyway. So, but I might be the
Yeah,
insurance company on the other side's expert.
that's kind of, I've been contacted on another case, so it's not the kind of thing I ever thought I would be involved in, but I don't know if it's public profile or whatever. They Google horse trainers, and because I have a social media, if I pop up or whatever. But the other case I was asked to consult on was, there was a horse trainer who had a horse get out and get hit by a car, and he had a air quotes gate on his property that was a single strand of barbed wire run across the gate hole, and it was his lawyers, and they wanted me to back up and say that a single strand of barbed wire was a reasonable fence and everything. I was like, yeah, I don't think I can. I don't think I could say that. I'm not your guy here, but
Yeah, I
anyway.
think that's a case they might ought to settle. So,
Okay. Next question. So, what liability exposure do landowners have if trail riders cross private property? So, I guess this is kind of the trespassing question again, which may be state specific, but um,
yeah, and that one really is state specific because a lot of states have statutes that protect landowners if they allow people to participate in certain types of outdoor recreation on their property. So that is a really fact-specific question. I would say that if you are allowing people to come and ride on your property, number one, don't charge them because that turns it into a commercial activity. I mean, don't charge them unless you have some kind of business like a boarding barn where you allow haul-ins where you're going to have commercial insurance anyway. But certainly, allowing people just as a favor, to come and ride on your property, the best thing you could do is, again, have a liability release that they sign before anybody sets a hoof on your property. And then again, your umbrella liability policy. I am certainly pro allowing people to trail ride wherever it's still possible and makes sense. So, but at the same time, you still have to protect yourself. If they run into a nest of bees and, their horse bucks them off and, they come to you looking for you to take responsibility, you got to have a backstop there.
I guess everybody's a nice person until something actually happens, and then who knows where things might go, right? So,
Well, and
yeah.
fun fact, Daniel, that sometimes the insurance companies who pay for the hospital bills, that I have an acquaintance who was pretty seriously injured at a 3-day eventing thing, and she showed me the form that they gave her insurance company gave her in the hospital, basically asking whether anybody besides her could be responsible for her injuries. And, she was horrified by this and, sent a copy to me like, is this normal? And that was an eye opener for me. I mean, I guess it makes sense because, if they're paying, hundreds of thousands of dollars, can they try and recoup that from somebody? It's scary.
Mm, yes, ma'am. Um, I'll tell you what, how about we've gotten heavy? How about a moment of levity and we'll go to our sponsor for this particular episode? Um,
Excellent. I'm
I,
ready.
I found a special one for you. This is ELSE, Extra Legal Solutions Enterprises. Have you ever been in a bind and wanted some justice? Have you ever been unsatisfied by the current legal systems and costs? Extra Legal Solutions Enterprises knows where you're coming from and can help you get where you want to be. If making them feel worse is going to make you feel better, don't put a pin in that thought. Put a pin in one of our effigy dolls and let that pin speak for you. Make the offending party squirm like a worm on a hook. They're probably spineless anyway. Focus your hate and let them feel like the bait. Some call it voodoo, hoodoo. You can. Our custom effigies come with a choice of stature and build, eye color, hairstyle and color. Yes, we have many Karen models available, and even stupid skinny jeans if it's a guy. Or you can make them dance, make them cringe, give them a reoccurring pain in the whatever area comes to mind. Feel satisfied with an alibi. April, stop! Ah, that is not funny. Stop! Ah, baby, please stop. Stop. Extra Legal Solutions Enterprises is here to give you the justice you deserve and them the pain they deserve. As you've just witnessed, I'm not only an ELSE customer, I'm also a victim.
Well, and hey, Daniel, I mean, I think you're onto something here. It's boy, there are days when I'd consider buying one of those.
Absolutely. They say like whether you're supposed to write a hate email and then burn it the next day or something. Just makes you feel better. You get it out of your system, you vent. A little doll to punch or burn or put a pin in or whatever, it might make us feel a lot better. Call it mental health strategy, or I don't know.
Well, it's a lot cheaper than hiring a lawyer too.
A lot cheaper, yes. Oh. Um so so I guess we'll shift out of the personal injury side of this and all of that kind of stuff down to some of the sales deals. So handshake deals. I'm as guilty of this as any human being on the face of the earth. I still do a lot of handshake deals. I really shouldn't. I have for sure been burned multiple times on that kind of stuff. I'll give you some details on the last one that I'm kicking myself on. This caused me to write a whole article about it, but it's a group of people that I knew very well, and they had come across a deal. They're all professionals, where there was a particular very nice barn billionaire kind of a guy getting rid of some horses, but his bottom of the barrel stuff is the kind of stuff most of us dream of owning, right? And so He was just giving horses. He wasn't. He has barn managers and people that facilitate all this, so he may not have a clue any of this is going on. But anyway, they send a trailer up there with this one particular young guy who picks up half a dozen horses or whatever it is. They have a transfer on all of these horses right there in the parking lot. He's the only one there. He signs all of them. That's not the deal. He's supposed to get one of them, and then other people are getting other ones and so forth. So he comes back, horses are dispersed, months go by, this person has their horse, this person has their horse. But as happens commonly, the transfers aren't dealt with, processed, so forth. So technically, months later, all of these transfer papers exist that still have his name on them. And then people decide to sell the horse. One of them was traded to me. And then this guy months later decides not to honor the commitment that everybody has verbally and sign things over, and now he wants possession of all of the horses, and now people have money invested in him. Like, it didn't like this just happened and now I spent thousands of dollars on this horse that I thought was mine, and now you're claiming it's yours and your signature is on the paper. And it became a whole big deal. And I still have a horse out in pasture. I've had a decade now that I don't have clear title to over this whole fiasco. So handshake deals, there's one example of how they can go poorly. Is there any scenario in which that's not a bad idea at this point in time in the world, or what?
Well, if there is one, Daniel, I can't think of it.
How many horses out there do you think are traveling around with a transfer that is signed, but the person hasn't actually sent it in and processed it and transferred the horse to their name? I bet it's a huge percentage. I
I was guessing over 50%.
I think it's, yeah.
Unless the buyer is going to show the horse, and needs to transfer the papers, oftentimes they don't send in the papers. But, fun fact that whose name is on the registration papers is just one piece of evidence about who the legal owner of the horse is. That, in just that situation, you can buy a horse, for valuable consideration for somebody and, either get the papers or not get the papers, but it doesn't make the horse any less yours, that you paid for it, bought it from whoever was then the legal owner. And so they can't show up, 10 years down the line, waving the papers saying, ha ha, you put all this money into training and showing this horse, and guess what? My name is still on the papers, so it's mine. That there's this little thing called unjust enrichment that if they decided to come after you in an ownership dispute, you would have a counterclaim for all the money you put into the horse, which was probably more than you paid for it in the first place. So.
Mm-hmm. I've kind of always thought that if anybody comes looking for this horse 10 or 12 years later or whatever and wants to claim it, I've got a hell of an invoice for them to pay right before it's going to be theirs, right? So if you want to pay that invoice, then sure, take him, but otherwise. So let's say a horse is for sale and a person wants to purchase or lease. I've kind of always had a little dollar amount in mind. Which I probably need to adjust given inflation and all of that these days. But kind of to me, about $5,000 was always the point at which vet checks needed to happen. Paperwork probably needed to be there. But if it was kind of a $1,500 horse, then is it really worth the extra expense of all of that kind of stuff? So do you have any feelings on that? Does that make no sense? And no, Daniel, do not do that. Every horse gets vet checked and da-da-da-da-da. Or because a vet check could be $600 if it's a $1,500 horse and he looks pretty sound to me. Like, there's kind of a risk of acceptance there. But if it's $25,000 horse, now the $600 percentage wise is an easy decision to make. So am I crazy there? What are your thoughts on that?
So here's my thought. There's nothing more expensive than a cheap horse. Unless it's a free horse. That once you get them home, if there's something wrong with them, you're going to have to pay to diagnose it, pay to treat it, And maybe you've got a $1,500 pasture pet who's now going to be living out his days, eating his head off in your back 40. That, like you said, there is now no real safety net, no real outlet for horses in the United States, that used to be, there were, and of course there still are, auctions that have killer buyers. Many of them are, concentrated in states where it's pretty easy to get those horses to Mexico or Canada. The unfortunate reality is that if you buy a $1,500 horse and you get him home and he is not usable, he's going to cost you way more than $1,500 over the rest of his life to take care of him. Or even if you had to euthanize him, that's more than $1,500 now. So, my thinking is do not buy a problem. And if you can avoid it, a good friend of mine right now is looking for a horse, and she just had a thorough pre-purchase exam on a horse that she took on trial, which smart, if that's an option for you. And I think she said that the PPE was $1,600, and the horse vetted clean. But during the trial period, her trainer rode the horse, and it's like, this is not the right horse for you. He's argumentative. You guys aren't going to get along. And so my friend was lamenting that she'd spent $1,600 on the vet check, for a horse that she didn't end up buying. And I said, but boy, I said, think about how much money you would have spent with a few months of training, before you could get this horse resold. I said, you would be racking that up in no time at all. And plus, you'd have to pay your trainer a commission to turn around and resell them for you. I said, but instead you dodged a bullet and now you can go look for something that's a better match. I think the price of the horse is sort of immaterial these days because of how expensive they are to keep.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, even I remember when like strategy was $6.50 a bag, and hay was $2.50 a bale, and we're just in a whole different world now in terms of the costs and upkeeps and yeah, it's something.
Well, just look at the cost of, barefoot trim now.
Yes, ma'am.
It's everything, and no shade on farriers, certainly not. I mean, they work really hard and earn every penny they make. But, every single thing to do with horse ownership has gotten exponentially more expensive in the last decade.
I'm going to ask you a little bit of a selfish question now, because this is this may be specific to my state. I don't know, but right around the time that slaughter was banned, I was predominantly a 2-year-old man in the cutting horse world prior to that. And for whatever reason, when that happened, the 2-year-old business just about dried up, starting colts. And I, to this day, I can't explain why this happened, but I started getting a ton of older horses to break, like 8-year-olds, 12-year-olds. I mean, I broke a bunch of them. Like 60% of the horses in the barn were 8 or older, and were just getting started. I don't know why, but it triggered that cascade with me for some reason. I had in a 5 or 7 year period about a dozen horses put into training with me and never picked up. So basically, here's my problem. Enjoy that. Most of them didn't pay the bill. In the state of Louisiana, I can legally take that horse to the sale barn and sell it and keep up to the amount of what I'm owed. But this is post slaughter ban, so that horse is going to bring $175, and I'm owed $1,300 or something. So it doesn't touch the problem. And I can still say to this day, I have never sold a horse for slaughter. And to me, being able to say that honestly is certainly worth a lot more than the few $100s that those horses would have brought. So I've got a dozen horses out in pasture getting older that are going to just die off year by year at this point that I don't have clear title to. According to the state's agriculture department, I will never have clear title to these horses. There's no law that allows Daniel to become owner. I can go through, for the ones that are registered, the breed associations in which I have to pay a fee, fill out an affidavit, and then go through a committee where they may or may not grant me the papers of the horse. And so it's been like I've changed the way I do business because of that whole deal, and I haven't had any of that happen since. But I'm just kind of curious on your thoughts on that, where I've got plenty of acreage. They're just horses. They're out there. They're a nice little herd. They're pretty. I have a relationship with. I don't really ride them or do much with most of those horses because there kind of is like a boundary there to me that's not really my horse, and so I'm still a little more hands off. But at the same time, if he gets cut, I'm taking him to the vet, and I have to deal with or whatever. I feel responsible for them. But there's some more handshake deals. That was a time which there was no contracts. I now take a deposit, so I make sure that the customer has skin in the game, and I'm at least covering some feed or whatever before. So thoughts on that? I guess, how stupid am I?
So to your question about whether that's state specific, I mean, the states all have different lien laws that they all say different things, but a lot of states have statutes that give somebody who's providing services to livestock, a lien, kind of like a mechanic's lien, on the animals that are in their care. But in many cases, these statutes date back to the cattle rustling days when the cattle were worth much more than the cost of feeding them. So many times these statutes say that you got to go get a court order in order to be able to sell the livestock to satisfy the lien. In almost every case that's ever come across my desk in several decades, the horses are not worth as much money as it costs to go get that court order. That my advice is always the same when I've got somebody who's a trainer or a boarding facility owner, and that is do everything you can to just get the owner to come pick up that horse and get it off your payroll, and then come after them for the money they owe you. That horse is, eating you out of house and home. It's filling up a space that could be taken up by a paying customer's horse. This is a lose-lose for you, that hopefully you get them to pick up the horse while you're still owed something that's in small claims territory, and then you can DIY it and take them to small claims. So collateral that eats is not good collateral. So
When I was still apprenticing, one of the guys I worked under had a horse like that where the guy fell behind and he just wound up putting it on board, and he kept the horse kind of as the collateral and all. And I was always scratching my head. I was like, man, this is a $2,500 horse. In 3 months time, you have lost way more than you would have if you'd have just sent this thing home and got him off of the, even if you didn't collect a penny, you're still money ahead by just opening the hole and getting him out of here. And then here I am with 10 of the damn things. So what do I know? But anyway.
yeah, it takes a special kind of person to drop their horse off at a trainer and then just never pay you and never pick them up. I mean, what bad fortune you had to run into 10 of them, Daniel.
I have some feelings on that for sure, and I've done a couple of them. Well, one, he's no longer with us. I wound up putting him down, but he was a hurricane rescue that was in really bad shape, and I still, like, that guy could show up here tomorrow wanting his horse back. I probably put that horse down 6 or 7 years ago. But that is a little bit of that nightmare that I have, that person's gonna show back up and then want their horse or something, and like that thing, anyway, that's the world we live in, I guess. But yeah, I must have sucker written on my forehead to have this big of a collection of stupid mistakes. But anyway, so one thing, we talked a little bit about this, and I'm kind of curious if you have dealt with this, because in my experience, these things are nothing but a legal nightmare and an ethical one as well. The kill pens. and I don't know if this is true in your area, but in my area, we had one particular one where they would, they're going to fill a contract of 80 head or whatever. They're going to buy 90. They're going to find the 3 pretty fat ones or whatever, 2 for 3 that can ride. And then they're going to put them up for bail on Facebook. And now the horse they paid $117 for is $1,800. And as soon as the group me thing buys the horse and we select the lady that's going to actually get it, she can't get it for 3 weeks, and they don't feed him again the day after they're paid, and so he starves together in a dry lot and shows up with strangles 3 weeks later, lost 800 pounds. And that seems to be a very common scenario. I don't know, thoughts on that? Like, that there seems like a whole bunch. I have that particular place is called Thompson's Horse Lot. They're not in the state anymore, I don't believe. Like, those people must have known as much about the law as a lawyer, because they knew exactly how far they could push certain things without actually crossing the line that would have triggered, like, you would not have thought, but they had so many law enforcement agencies watching them and waiting on the moment when they could, and they would always stay just under whatever line they had to stay under before they something would actually happen. I think it took 10 years of the ag department on their butts before anything finally happened, and all they did was cross state lines and became Texas's problem after that anyway. So I guess thoughts on that. What would you have you dealt with any of these kinds of cases with kill pen horses? And
So, the short answer is no, because they're always under the dollar threshold that somebody would even want to pay me a consultation for. But I'm certainly aware of the whole industry that has grown up around, like you say, bailing these horses out of alleged kill pens. That there's a ton of scammers out there, that some of them will go to these holding pens, and then they're nonprofits, and I put that in air quotes, that have this network of followers on social media that get people to contribute money to get these horses out of there, and maybe the horses get out of there and maybe they don't. That's another one of the scams. It's certainly there's no law against the kill buyer going to an auction, paying, $117 for the horse, and then turning around and charging 1,800 for it. I mean, he's within his legal rights to do that. People have been doing that at horse auctions for centuries, going and finding a deal and then flipping it. There's nothing wrong with that, from a legal perspective anyway. But, I think P.T. Barnum was right, that there is a sucker born every minute. So,
yeah, if the words bail are involved in a transaction with a horse, probably you should just walk away from that, right? That'd be good sound advice right there.
yeah, I mean, I think the only way I personally would buy a horse at auction would be really young stock that wasn't started under saddle. Like yearling, weanling, something that somebody was just looking to make a quick sale and get rid of, but there wasn't anything wrong with it. I'd be super leery about any riding horse, because there's a good chance that the reason that it's at the auction is it's got issues, behavioral or soundness or both. So, a lot of the reasons that these horses are in these, kill buyer auctions is that there's something pretty serious wrong with them.
Yeah, I
And
would agree.
this
Well,
is gonna sound super heartless, but it is my personal opinion that not every single horse should be saved.
I agree with you. And you kind of alluded to it a minute ago, but the rescue thing has become an industry unto itself, and there are some legitimate ones, but there are definitely also some illegitimate ones. Or I've seen, probably the most common scenario is people with a soft heart that have that I want to save everything, but they don't really actually know anything about horses. And so the reality is the horses wind up in a worse situation in the rescue. And then I could name a dozen cases that I know of where horses had to be rescued from the rescue, you know. And I can think of one where I was asked to consult with a farrier friend of mine and a vet, and there was a horse that was very badly foundered, And it was the opinion of the farrier, myself, and the vet all that, like, you need to euthanize this thing yesterday. And this lady just would not give up. No, we're going to save him. That she spent a couple $1,000s, a few months of more pain for that horse before she finally made the decision. And it was just like, when three really experienced people looking at this horse all told you at the same time, this is not savable, like, you should have listened. That you did not do a good thing in this case. You prolonged the suffering of an animal that should have been let go. So I don't, that word rescue has become like, I almost vomit a little bit in the back of my throat. I know some good ones. I mean, it's not always the case, but God, there's a lot of them that just leave a bad taste in my mouth too. So
Yeah, I could not agree more that, some of them are just hoarder situations. I mean, pure and simple. Some of them are nonprofits in name only, that they, exist to accept donations, and then, the people that are running them are pretty handsomely paid, either under the table or not. And some of them, I really have an ethical problem with their selection process of what horses they take in and then how they place them. That, I'm thinking of a rescue that I'm aware of that's a legitimate organization, but they have transitioned from taking in horses that were either already usable riding horses or potential usable riding horses. And they used to have, local trainers that would work with them to, get these horses to a point where they had a good chance at a useful future. And I read in their most recent glossy report with lots of pictures that the majority of the horses that they placed last year were companion animals. And I thought, wow, first of all, who has the land and the money to take in all these companion animals? And then what happens when, let's say that horse is 10 now. What happens when that horse is 20 something and the person who's my age is now, in their 70s and can't stay on that property anymore and the rescue's out of business? Then what happens? If that horse had been a riding horse from the start, there'd be a good shot at finding it another, good home. But I worry that, usable animals are being, turned down by this particular organization, and then they're taking in these super hardship cases. And, of course, they have this big social media presence where, they're seeking donations for the often extremely expensive major interventions, that these, unrideable and never will be rideable horses need to even make them pasture comfortable. And so my personal opinion is that I have ethical problems with that.
I agree with you. I think that their empathy is an important quality, but you can have too much of it, just as you can have too much of some other qualities, and it can lead to some bad or unfortunate decisions like that. Yeah.
Well, and if you're spending, say, $6,000 for a surgery for a pasture pet, how many horses that had nothing wrong with them could you have helped?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So,
Absolutely.
there has to be some element of pragmatism, but often it's not there.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the offerings that you've got on your website. And of course, as always, we'll have links in the show notes to your site and everything. But you've got some pre-made forms. I think you said earlier, one size fits most, on some of that stuff. You do consultations and stuff. So what sort of offerings do you have? And as a secondary question, you're practicing law in 4 states. I don't happen to live in any of those. So is a guy from Louisiana a likely customer for you that you can actually help, or is it needs to be someone who is more in one of those 4 states because the case law state to state changes so much, or what?
Well, for our stock forms, anybody, in any of the 50 states, those would be good for. And we do have some, state specific addenda, to address, the equine activity liability acts that are particular to states. So, but in terms of, representing clients, like whether that's drafting a customized contract for them or representing them in litigation, that either the client has to live in one of the states where I'm licensed to practice, or they have a matter pending before, a governing body of horse sport, or they have a matter pending somewhere else, but they associate with local counsel. Like I have a case right now in Arizona, and I'm not licensed in Arizona, but you can be licensed, on a provisional basis, like on a case by case basis, to handle certain things. So, in terms of consultations, I offer those only to the folks that, are in a state where I'm licensed to practice, or, have one of the other scenarios that I described.
But for the basic template forms, those would be valid for pretty much anybody else.
Right. So, and, over a couple of decades, I've developed this suite of forms that, cover many of the sort of routine transactions and situations in the horse industry. And it may not be one size fits most, but it's one size fits many. And, certainly, without tooting my own horn too much, I can say that they're a whole lot better than, what somebody might cobble together from using their buddies' contracts.
Well, I also see on your website that you do some speaking engagements. So are there any places in the future that you're locked down to go give talks at or anything like that at this time?
So the next one that I'm aware of coming up is the American Quarter Horse Association has a professional horseman, seminar in Las Vegas in January. You don't have to be a pro horseman or even an AQHA member to go. I went last year as, just an attendee, and it was fantastic, Daniel. The AQHA has some corporate sponsors who heavily subsidize the cost. So it was really inexpensive. And I learned so much that they had, some fantastic experts about financial stuff, how to run your business. They had social media people that gave talks. They had someone, a colleague of mine, Yvonne Okran, who gave a legal talk. I mean, it was fabulous. I'm going back next year, and I think I'm going to be the legal speaker coming up. I was talking to the folks who put it on while I was there, but I haven't seen the paperwork, but it's a long way off. But
Waiting on the contract.
even if I'm not a speaker, I'm definitely going to go to it again because I thought it was so valuable.
That's very good. I have to say the AQHA, I have generally not been fond of a lot of stuff that they've done lately, particularly like with the reproductive stuff with mares and all of that. I see you're looking at me. You're not quite sure.
Like embryo transfers, you mean?
Yeah, we have all of these different reproductive strategies now, but the bottom side of the pedigree has always been the weak side because, mare can only have one baby a year, and now we have resit mares and things like that. So these superior mares, we can flush them and get more babies, but the AQHA will only allow you to register 2 a year. And then now they have changed the date of death stuff. So even after they die, I think they limited the number of years you could still register any frozen embryos or anything like that. And I'm pretty patently against that. When a mediocre stallion could have 1,000 babies and you register every one of them, why shouldn't a superior mare have 20? I mean, it just seems like let's improve the genetics from the bottom side as well, right? But anyway, that's where we are with that.
Well, in my opinion, this is absolutely the Pro Horseman program. I've been a member of it since almost the start of it, and I think it's a terrific program and continues to get better.
That's good. I'm encouraged. I'm going to look into it. That sounds pretty good.
And I am not a paid spokesperson, I might add.
I guess the next and last thing I wanted to talk about with you was one of those things that's always seemed a nightmare scenario to me that deals with the liability, and that is some of the therapeutic riding sort of endeavors. I've volunteered with multiple such associations, and I've done some clinics and education for others. And like when we're talking about the things that can happen dangerously with a horse, and then we're gonna add a person to that mix that is physically or mentally compromised in some manner, like it's just always terrified me, the what can happen. And don't get me wrong, I have seen some miracles occur. I very much believe in those types of programs and the effects that they can have. But on the liability side of that, like it just seems like an accident waiting to happen, sort of an inevitable deal. So are there any specific type of protections legally for those types of things, or is that just get as much insurance as you can together and hope for the best? Or
Well, and have pretty robust liability releases that are specific to the particular type of therapeutic endeavor that you're in. Some of them are mounted, some of them aren't. Some of them, the patient is loose with the horses, some of them they're not. I think, because that is a really good example, just like the dude strings, that you are dealing primarily with a segment of the public that has no horse experience whatsoever. The closest that they've come to a horse is, watching the Disney Spirit movie. So, and, especially when you're dealing with, parents that have, children who are medically fragile or who have, neurological considerations that, I share your it's a nightmare waiting to happen. I mean, just like any horse endeavor, it's not if you're going to have an accident, it's when. You just, if you haven't had an accident, you haven't been doing it long enough. So yeah, I mean, just like any other horse related business, robust liability releases and insurance that's adequate in amount to cover, what you're doing, that most of the time, if you have a serious horse wreck, it's going to be like catastrophic, like brain injury, really terrible things. So, take a look at the limits of your policy and make sure it covers it. And then a lot of therapeutic riding, operators operate out of facilities that don't belong to them. So, if you are the facility owner, you want to make sure you have your own insurance. You want to make sure that the people who are operating the business on your property have their own insurance, and name all of the property owners as additional insureds, and that the liability releases that the service providers have, are appropriate and include the property owners.
well, I'm kind of out of stuff to ask you. Is there anything that you would like to talk about that I haven't brought up? Something you just want to get off your chest and everybody needs to know this and you want to shout it from the rooftops? Anything like that?
So, something I deal with a fair bit in my practice in terms of consultations with people, because it doesn't usually rise to the level of a lawsuit, is social media disparagement. And then, for example, somebody posts something about somebody and a whole bunch of people pile on and say, well, yeah, that person's an absolute crook, blah, blah, blah. I'd never buy a horse from them. People that, troll clinicians in particular. I've had clients who are clinicians that had people that, that were a little unhinged, that would like show up to their, clinics, that were at horse expo type things, heckle them, where we had to have like security briefed ahead of time, those kinds of, yeah, seriously. That, I've always said, if you ask, two horse people their opinions about something, you'll get four different opinions. So, that there's a lot of polarization, in our country to begin with. And, the whole horse world has always been a little bit polarized, but I think now more than ever. And so you deal with situations now where it's so much easier to ruin somebody's sale or somebody's reputation by, clicking away at a keyboard. And so I think folks need to be really careful what they post on the internet, both stuff that they post about themselves and stuff about other people, that, I will quite candidly say that much of the evidence that I have these days in a lot of my cases is social media messages, emails, social media posts. I mean, it's astonishing to me the challenged judgment that some people have in what they post. Not just about other people, but about themselves. I would say if you would not say it to someone's face, don't post it on the internet. But I have folks who come to me with situations where people are trashing them on the internet, and they're like, well, what can I do? And sometimes depending on the platform, there are ways that you can go about it to get those things removed. Most of the time I say people who are agitators like that they thrive on drama, and so if you don't respond and engage with them, they get bored pretty quickly and move on to their next target.
Yeah, social media is, it shows the underbelly of the world, doesn't it? I mean, yeah, I am exactly what you said. I am pretty regularly shocked at some of the stuff that people made a choice to put out there for the world to read, or video to see, or whatever. It's just, yeah, I I know just what you mean. And like you say, there are people whose entire presence is based upon drama and kind of the Jerry Springer of the horse world sort of a deal. And yep, I stay as far away from that as I possibly can. Life is short. So, oh,
Yeah. Yeah, I'm right there with you that I don't participate in any horse forums or anything like that because it's just, well, for one thing, I don't have the time. But but for another, I mean, it's a little frightening.
it that's a
But I think that as professionals, and this was something that we talked about a fair bit at the Pro Horseman conference, was as professionals, we're out there in the public light, when we're at clinics, when we're at horse shows, there's always somebody watching with a cell phone camera. And, how do we defend ourselves against that? And, we touched on this earlier, number one, don't do anything you wouldn't want to get caught on film. Sometimes that's not always possible. I mean, that you could be treating a horse in a way that's perfectly appropriate for the situation, and you'll have an army of internet trolls tell you it's abuse.
mhm.
And so it's not a bright line. And the consensus among the professionals was that the best thing you can do is don't feed the trolls. Don't engage with them, but then also have your own positive presence out there where you're out there showing all of the good things that you do. You've got a good website, you've got maybe a YouTube channel, you've got hopefully people in their 20s who can help manage it for you. And, but that's the best thing you can do is basically develop your own brand the way that you want to be seen.
So I have another question for you here. You said a word that reminded me of a question I meant to get into, and this is the deep end of the pool. So feel free to back up or put a life jacket on, or whatever. But
Well, there's probably hardly anybody listening at this point, Daniel. They're probably all snoozing away.
oh no, they're used to long ones with me. So um, but this kind of gets into the word abuse and the cruelty and the criminality. I have a little different take on this than a lot of people do. Like I wrote an article not long ago. There was one of the European deals put out a major paper on the crisis in the horse world. I think that things have improved tremendously for horses over the years. That is not to say that you will not find individual cases of bad things happening, but in my mind, there's never been a better time to be a horse in the history of the world than right now. And I think we get a little hyperbolic throwing some of these words around, like abuse and cruelty and crisis and things like that. And I think it is especially with the social license to operate and those sorts of things happening now, that the hyperbole and sort of the range of bad, the relative scale, is kept at the forefront of our mind. A 2 is not an 8. You know, this is one of the specific things that I talk about. Is this has been a couple of Olympics ago, but there was the German pentathlete who had the horse that was balking, and the trainer reaches across and slaps the horse on the butt, and I mean the world lost its mind over that. And now they're pulling horses out of the pentathlon in the Olympics. Now there's fewer and fewer events horses will be in. And when I watch that as a horse trainer and someone who reads body language very well and understands behavior, that horse was very clearly in the sympathetic nervous system, adrenaline, cortisol, and that means that the sensitivity in that horse was gone at that point, and the degree of the whack on the butt that it got was something it wouldn't have even felt. And so, is that abuse? If it actually wasn't enough to register on the radar at all, it might look bad. I understand that, but I think when it like it could have been much worse. Was it unfortunate? Yeah. Was it against the rules? Clearly. Should a trainer, interfere and all of that stuff? No. But was it really something to the degree in that horse's mind that the world responded to? That horse could have been turned out in a paddock 20 minutes after that event and got kicked by another horse, and the degree of actual harm there would have been much higher, and nobody would have batted an eye at it because horses kick each other. It's what they do. Like that's just part of being a horse. And so like that whole relative scale of what actually just did happen seems to be lost on not just the people in our industry, but certainly the people outside of it that don't know much and are looking in, and we keep getting these black eyes. I feel like we have lost that concept of relative scale of bad. Things that are unfortunate or could have been better are inevitably going to happen, but it doesn't mean that they were terrible. I mean, a 2 is not an 8. So I guess I'll throw that hot potato to you now. You feel free to have a different take. I mean, again, I think something can be unfortunate without being horrific. I think there is a matter of scale there that actually is important. And on your end, like to me, if I hear people throwing out words like abuse and cruelty, these are words to me that have a context of criminality to them. And so those are not things that should be thrown out lightly. If I'm going to call something abuse, like it's a hill I'm willing to die on kind of a thing. I'm not going to risk saying that word about you handling this horse unless I'm really willing to take all consequences that might bring my way, So those are my thoughts. I'll throw that to you now.
Yeah, I agree with you, Daniel, that there has to be some sort of discretion and judgment, that there is a scale. I mean, are some incidents regrettable, but not criminal? Absolutely. That I think that's what happens, is that, those incidents become clickbait, and then you have a bunch of people piling on that, you were talking about facts about how the sympathetic nervous system works, and looking at it from a scientifically informed perspective. The vast majority of people who watched that video looked at it with feelings. And so, I think that's an important component in deciding whether something is inappropriate versus abuse or cruelty, is what was the actual impact on the animal, not the impact on the person who was watching it. And those are two really different things. Well, it seems like it plays into the mindset of, I shouldn't have to see anything that's uncomfortable for me. And I think that's a really slippery slope. Do I think that some of the things that I've seen on social media and elsewhere where, professionals either recused themselves from competition, withdrew, or basically got canceled by an internet mob, Do I find some of those things troubling to watch as a horse person? Yes. Do I think they deserve to be crucified because of it? Absolutely not.
In most
Like,
cases,
like
I'll say
I
I've
mean,
seen a couple
there's a
things that,
sliding.
yeah. But,
Well, I think you're right that there's a sliding scale that, I mean, you and I are old enough to remember, the scandal where, they had the guy who was going around electrocuting horses for the insurance money. You know, I think pretty much everyone could agree that that was cruel. So, that there are some, pretty black and white situations, but when you're talking about a human disciplining a horse in a tense moment, I think it's really context specific. And like you say, what was the actual impact on the animal?
that ties in, and I've said this a bunch of times on the podcast, but like where I was talking about the USDA and the PAST Act and all of that stuff before in 2016, when the PAST Act actually passed and the APHIS rules were written. And keep in mind that the PAST Act is an amendment to the Horse Protection Act. It wasn't, I forget exactly how many pages it was. It was like 13 pages long or something. The APHIS rules on the policies and procedures of how to enforce that was like 300 pages long. And a lot of people don't realize that. And then, like, part of that, there was a specific sentence in there. This was the biggest red flag of the whole thing, that was going to make it a criminal act of cruelty to perform knowingly any act that would foreseeably cause pain to a horse. Well, on the surface, that sounds pretty reasonable. I don't want people doing things to intentionally cause pain to a horse until my vet needs to give him a shot, and until my farrier needs to put hoof testers on there to find an abscess. Can you breed a mare without expecting that she's going to have pain when she foals? And so, like, the law of unintended consequences on some of these things is pretty catastrophic. I always make the joke of Bob Barker with his tagline of "Have your pets spayed and neutered." Let's snap our fingers and give Bob his wish. Dogs and cats go extinct in 20 years. Right? I mean, sometimes these sort of ideals, pie in the sky thoughts, if we really think about what the consequences of doing that would be, it's actually catastrophic, not helpful. And so that's the kind of stuff that scares me out there, because like you said, the internet mob comes on there, and you go on the internet and try to defend, yeah, we need to have the right to cause pain to horses. That's not going to go very well for you. But realistically speaking, make that criminal. And
There's a not insignificant contingent out there that thinks that people shouldn't own or ride horses or handle them at all. That group of people doesn't explain what would happen to all of the horses who are already in captivity. But it's not insignificant, and I would say it is a group that seems to be growing.
yes, ma'am. They're also a group there in their hidden agenda. Extinction is a more valid option to them than a single animal in captivity or so forth. Like they have that history of euthanizing 90% of the animals surrendered to them and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. Yep. I know exactly what you mean. Yes, ma'am.
Well, and that ties back into what you're saying about the social license to operate.
It gets hard to control the conversation when people within our ranks are doing stupid stuff that they shouldn't be showing out there on the internet anyway, right? Like they're not helping our cause by going out there and proving that, yes, I can get away with doing something stupid. Like, that's costing this a lot more than you realize that it is. But tell a 20-year-old at the NFR that and see if they listen, right? Well, Rachel, it has been a pleasure having this conversation with you. I have learned a ton. I'm definitely not going to sleep tonight, but I'm going to get up 9 times and check all of the gates and develop OCD over this kind of stuff. Walk the perimeter fences with a flashlight, but that's okay. It is what it is.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I hate to cause anybody to lose sleep, Daniel.
No. Oh, but I very much appreciate your time and coming on. Like I say, we will have links in the show notes to your social media offerings and the website and everything. And it's a very easy to navigate website, simple and straightforward. So if y'all are looking for any of the forms or to contact Rachel for a consultation, it'll be very simple to do through the website and everything. So,
And we have a very large library of articles that are completely free on our website about almost every legal topic you could think of. So,
well, I appreciate what you're doing out there and bringing this knowledge to the people in our world, because I do think it's underutilized and undervalued for the most part. It's a shame we live in a world where we need contracts and waivers, but it's just the reality of it. We do need to protect ourselves and that kind of thing. So might as well have an expert help you navigate that. Make sure you have the right magic words in your waiver and your contract, right?
yeah, well, it's been a pleasure. And I now have horses to feed and stalls to clean.
Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Daniel.